Hello, friends. Welcome to Feeling This Life. We're a family support podcast that dives deep into the triumphs, challenges, and strategies that are part of the lives of those who care for children with blindness and visual impairments. I'm Paige Maynard, and I'm a teacher of the visually impaired and an early interventionist at VIPS, Visually Impaired Preschool Services.
And I'm Dr. Cathy Smith, and I also have been a teacher of students with visual impairment for many years, and now I am the Director of Research at Anchor Center for Blind Children.
I am jcastenir, and I am the Family Services Coordinator at VIPS. I am the mother of 3 girls, and my youngest has a visual impairment.
We've titled today's episode, Fear Less, Do More. You'll hear today's guest, Wendy Fagan, talk about sports and movement. Hearing this title and topic may or may not feel like it applies to your child, but I encourage you to keep listening because being active and taking part in sports and games and recreation is individual to your child and family. And we hope that after listening, you'll come away empowered to help your child participate in a way that builds their self-esteem. Wendy is the director of Envision Blind Sports Camp in Erie, Pennsylvania. We're so excited for you all to hear everything that she has to say. And then at the end, we're going to get to hear some exciting information about the camps that she offers. Just a heads up that you'll hear Wendy talk about running and jumping. We do acknowledge that there are ways to run and jump that promote good body mechanics, and we also know that your child might run and jump in their own way, and we honor and celebrate that too.
When you are the parent of a child with a visual impairment, often many things are fighting for your attention and your time and your child's time, whether it be therapies, doctor appointments, appointments with school systems. Why do you think that it's important for a child to be involved in sports or extracurricular activities, and when should that start?
The earlier that these kids learn how to run correctly, jump correctly, and have expectations that they can move in the same manner as their sighted peer, the better it is for that kid. If we don't get kids till they're 10 and 12, which happens a lot, that sometimes sports and physical movement are kind of put on the end. And then we have these kids that can't run properly and can't jump properly and can't make that transition because they don't have those skills. It takes a long time. And sometimes I think we can educate the parents. Have these expectations for your kids to pick their feet up. Have these expectations for your kids to run freely, because we have all these crazy running patterns because they're not taught how to run correctly.
I know it probably sounds silly to some people, but I think that putting your kid out there into a sport could bring some level of fear. What advice do you have for parents that are actually scared either for their child's safety or just putting them out there to try something new?
Our whole organization is fear less, do more. And when I say fear less, do more, I mean that for the athletes, but I also mean it for the parents. I think some of our biggest barriers to our kids are their parents and or their educators. Let's not put the limits on. Let's find out what your kid can be best at. So much joy comes from moving our body and from participating in sports. And I would just say, try to get past your own fears and hesitation with your child, or past the fears of someone else that's dealing with them, a PE teacher, therapist, a school teacher who says, that's not really an option, because once you see what they can do, the power that you will give to your child, that you can't replace that feeling of knowing that they can do things.
I agree with you. I think that sometimes our fears as parents can trump our child's fears. Like maybe they're willing to try it, don't think it's a big deal. What sports do you think have the most opportunity for children with a visual impairment?
Some of the first sports that come to mind that are, for lack of a better word, blind friendly. The first one is obviously wrestling, track and field, cross country, swimming is phenomenal. They really can compete against their peers. Same with track and field, with just a little bit of education, getting a guide runner or just providing an extra lane for safety. All kids can compete in that. They can do all the activities within that event. Any of the martial arts in the community is a great thing for kids, minor modifications for that. All the boating As long as you have someone that's there to be a sighted guide or human guide, you've got all the kayak, paddleboarding, all of those types of things. But when you think about traditional sports in the schools, some of those that I first mentioned jump out as the ones that I see my kids going back into the high school and being incredibly successful in. Obviously, sports like basketball, volleyball, where you have balls flying through the air, even tennis, even though blind tennis is a big sport that's coming, is that in the competitive mode, I mean, some of them just don't make sense if they're really wanting to be competitive at a high school level on an even playing field. Doesn't mean that they can't learn the sports, doesn't mean they can't play the sports. We just modify it to fit them. So it depends what the parent's looking for. But a lot of kids will start on those sports and be very successful. But once the ball starts to get faster and move a little quicker, they'll find that there might be other sports they gravitate to because they want to compete on an equal field. Finding out something that's an interest to your child, but that's also reasonable. Start with what I would consider a reasonable sport and then start to maybe push things a little bit. But there are some sports that are obviously more accessible and less threatening, for lack of a better word. But we believe kids should be able to try all different types of opportunities. Obviously, some need to be adapted.
I never really thought about how many sports are out there. You kind of just think of the ones that are prevalent in public schools, like you said, basketball, volleyball, but that's encouraging that there are so many options. Even though there are many options, a lot of times in the community, your family may be the only family that has a child with a visual impairment. How do you go about teaching coaches that may have never coached a child with a visual impairment? How do you make sure that your child is safe and accepted? Are there certain strategies to use?
That's the biggest challenge, I think, when you're talking about incorporating kids with visual impairments or blindness into local programming, is just the education. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of how kids with visual impairments are physically active and how they participate in sport. It's a challenge. I think sometimes people see, well, they're getting around. Like, I don't understand. Why would they need modifications? And they don't understand what it means to have a visual impairment. And just educating on that. Like, it's one thing to understand a blind child. It's completely different to understand a child that's visually impaired. We had a young lady that was going to just do swimming in her PE class. And the PE teacher's like, well, no, she can't swim. That's not safe. And the mom was like, well, what do you mean it's not safe? And the PE teacher's like, well, how is she going to get in the pool? And mind blown. Well, just like every other kid gets into the pool. And so it just took one trip to that high school to talk to that teacher, or one phone call to say, hey, if you're really nervous, let's have the child work with them for 15 minutes, or work with someone that understands adaptations. And then they realize that they're just afraid because they don't understand. But once they understand, they'll make the adjustments. I'm not saying it's always easy, and I'm not saying that everybody's always on board and willing to, jump right in and help a kid with a disability. But I think a lot of our people, once we explain to them how simple it can be, it's an education process, and it requires a little patience, and it requires some good communication, and hopefully someone that's willing to learn.
I know that several sports have resources online. For example, my daughter's a swimmer, and I know that USA Swimming has a whole section on disabilities, and then within that, a whole section on visual impairments. But what other resources would you recommend?
I would say the first thing would be to reach out to our organization and say, can you talk me through the steps? With Envision Blind Sports, we offer services that if a parent wants to call us, or if they even want us to call their coaches, to help be a bridge to that education. Because the hardest part is for the parents to get a little educated so they can help educate their coaches and say, okay, this is what we want to do. The opportunities are endless for what's available as once they get educated. You can email us, you can follow us on social media and reach us that way. You can go to our website, envisionblindsports.com, and reach out to us and say, I have a question. I'm more than happy to pick up the phone and answer questions. We just became members of Move United, nationwide organization. So I'd say that would be another way to finding other organizations, but there's only a limited number of organizations that really push sports for visually impaired.
What are some of the best tools that you've found for different sports? For example, we talked about my daughter being a swimmer. I know that I need the tapper. So that was kind of step one for us after talking to the coach, get the tapper. What are some other basic things that you would recommend?
Yeah, there's endless different types of modifications and adaptations for sport. But I think if a parent wants to start on a base level, depending on the vision level of their kid, something as simple as a tether, something where they can run independently, but using a guide would help them be successful in a lot of sports. So we have all this really expensive equipment for blind, but we also have equipment that costs 50 cents. Literally, you can make a tether out of rope and give this child the independence to run track, to run cross country, to do classes like physical education classes. Oftentimes a PE teacher is like, well, they can't run. Well, they can if you give them a guide. If they run with their guide, and they can be part of the activity. They can play baseball and kickball. They can be involved in relays. They just need something as simple as a rope with 2 strings around it, knotted together. And that allows that person to have that independence rather than trying to get through that environment that's very intimidating. So that would be the first thing I would invest in if your child is interested in any sports that involve running. Then another one is the 5-a-side soccer ball, or the blind soccer ball, is about $35 to $40. And I'm a huge believer in this ball. And if you've got a young kid, especially preschool, elementary school, that's doing things in school, it is the best ball. It has the best auditory sound. It's not annoying. The other kids won't be annoyed by it. It can be modified. It's not going to transfer into sports, but it does transfer into the physical education classroom as well as the home environment. It gives them a ball that they can locate on their own, that they could take out in the backyard to play with their siblings and feel like it's not someone saying it's to your left, to your left, to your right, to your right. Instead, they just can hear the ball and they know where it is. Kids are creative. Think about how many times we go in the backyard as kids and just make up games. So if you have a kid that's blind or visually impaired, that could really be valuable to a young family who wants to encourage their kids to move.
There's children that have very severe needs and there's children that do not. So I know that success is a very broad term when we're talking about our kids. Some people may look at success as going and making a friend to run with, where some people may be on the complete opposite side and look at success as my kid's going to go to the Paralympics. What are some of the best success stories that you've seen with kids?
Well, I could talk for years if we really got down to this, the type of success we see, but I know exactly, at least I think I understand what you're trying to say, is that our successes are we look at the kid and we say, okay, what do we hope to achieve for this child? And obviously every child is different. At Envision Blind Sports, our goal isn't to produce Paralympic athletes. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to meet the needs of every single athlete that comes in our door. And we want them to feel like they're an athlete. We want them to know that they're valued and that movement matters. And we want to give them that education and knowledge to know, like, hey, you can do these type of things that perhaps people have told you can't do. And just getting them educated on all the opportunities that they have and all the different things they can try. I coached at the Paralympic level back in the 90s, and it was great, but it wasn't where my heart was. My heart was in all the kids that aren't finding out about that, all the kids that aren't dreaming about being a Paralympic athlete, but all the kids want to be included in something in school, or I just want to be able to move. A lot of our kids that we meet will come and say, sister's on a swimming team, my brother plays baseball, I'm never involved. And one of the things that we hear from parents over and over again is that Envision gives them an opportunity to say, I have something, I have an activity that I get to do. And like I said, the other goal is to develop them into being able to go back into the community and find an appropriate place. And everyone's goals might be a little bit different. It might just be, well, I want my kids to be able to go out, interact in the backyard with their siblings, or do stuff with the neighbor kids, or I want my kid to be on a swim team, or I want my kid to wrestle. So that it varies. And we want to meet those needs of kids on every level.
Thank you so much for all the information that you've shared so far. A lot of this is stuff that I just really hadn't thought about before. I know that in the summer, something that a lot of kids do for fun is to go to camp. And you've told us a little tiny bit so far about your camp, but tell us more about it. I've heard fabulous things, so tell us about camp.
Absolutely. So we're a year-round program. We started here in January. We started off with a pretty extensive ski program and outdoor program. We've done cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, downhill. Downhill is the largest program that we have. We take several trips. We're actually taking our first trip to Vermont this year, where we're taking a group up to Mount Snow to ski. Traditionally, we ski in New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, different areas to make it more accessible to more kids. Then once we get into that early spring season, we do sports clinics, which are one-day clinics. This year, we're talking about potentially having a goal ball clinic with some of the athletes that have been on the national team to come back and help some of those kids that might be excited about a very specific sport for athletes that are blind. So we're always trying to promote those sports too. not just sports that you traditionally see in the high schools. And we'll go into the spring. We do a lot of outdoor recreation. We do paddleboarding, whitewater tubing, kayaking, canoeing, rock climbing, tandem biking. And then once we get into camp, that's where everything happens. So camp is a week-long opportunity where kids do about 25 different sports. And that's where blind sports like blind football or five-a-side football, whatever you want to call it, track and field, goal ball, beat baseball, soccer, longboarding, wrestling, judo, golf, biking, swimming. It's endless. Basketball, you name it. We've tried it. Lacrosse, we just added this year. We go to trampoline parks. We go out to lakes. We did a 4-mile kayak during camp this year. Tubing, we added sailing this year with a group up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which was really exciting. So it's kind of endless, the amount of sports that we introduce. And sometimes camp is really the best starting ground for someone because then their kids get a taste of all the different things that are available to them. And they can often go back into their community and say, all right, like I really love this. Can we find a place where I can do this in my community? And then we continue into the fall. We have a golf outing as well as golf clinic. And we just continue to do indoor and outdoor sport of all types. If it's out there, we try it. Blind tennis, we have brought into the program, and they're now developing tennis within the States a little more. So not every kid's going to love every sport, but it gives them an opportunity to find out what it is that gets them most excited. Like we have some kids, like their die-horse sport is skiing. We have other kids, it's goal ball. Other kids, it's track. We've had several kids that come to camp and learn the base knowledge of what they need to know, to how to make the sports adaptable for them so that they can go back into their middle schools and high school and say, hey, I want to run, I want to throw shot put, I want to wrestle, or join a local taekwondo or judo or karate type organization.
I love that. I love that you're letting them experience everything, things that I'm sure they never even dreamed of trying. Now, can anyone from the nation come to your camp?
Absolutely. So last year we had 10 different states at camp. Kids last year that flew in from Colorado and Hawaii, and then all the other states, I think most everybody drove in. So anywhere, usually within a 5-hour radius, but we have kids that drive 6, 7, 8 hours. Kids come from Kentucky, quite a little group coming up from there last year. If you talk to kids that come to camp, while sports and movement is important, there's other things that kind of trump all of that. And that is just the community, the friendships that they develop, that they communicate all year round, and they can't wait to come back to camp to see their friends again. The increase in their orientation mobility. We're huge believers in pushing the limits and making them being independent. We have 5-year-olds who come to camp and they're like getting themselves up and getting dressed and taking their showers and getting to breakfast. I mean, it just really empowers them. Empowerment is my favorite word because we're giving them the skills to be an independent person that can do all these things.
What about if they have siblings or friends? Maybe they're a little nervous about going to camp alone. Are sighted peers allowed to come?
Right now, we accept sighted siblings.
Okay.
So we have a number of kids that come with their siblings to camp. It's really a great opportunity for them to be able to come, and they get to learn about some of the blind sports and ways that sports are accessible for their siblings. And I think it increases awareness. For instance, there are several sports where the sighted sibling have to wear blindfolds to do them because the sport requires that, or because we require it, so that they understand what would the sport be like if I didn't have vision while I was doing it. So we haven't really opened to friends, but we do open to siblings.
Okay, that's great. I know you said blindfolds are worn. If there's a child that does have some usable vision, do they wear the blindfolds at all time as well? Or do you kind of work with them on tools that might assist them better while using the vision that they have?
That's an excellent question, and it really depends on the sport. So some sports require you to wear eye shades because it's the nature of the sport. So 5-a-side football, which is blind soccer, you have to wear eye shades in order to make the sport fair. But what we do at camp, to give you one example, is the system of B1, B2s, and B3s. Our B1 athletes are totally blind, and our B3 athletes are legally blind, and our B2 athletes are the athletes that are in between with the low vision but still have some usable vision, traditionally cane users. So if you have a sport like blind soccer, then everyone wears the eye shades because that's the way the sport works. But what then we do is we have a parallel game for our B3 athletes, where they may use a brightly colored ball and play traditional soccer, so that depending on the age of the child, depending on the type of leagues, they could go home and carry that into getting involved with a more traditional type of soccer, because obviously there's not going to be blind soccer teams all over the country. But for our B1 athletes, where that is really their only viable option, we want to make sure that we educate them that beat baseball is a sport that's played with eye shades, and so is goalball. For other sports like track and field, B1 athletes obviously don't have vision or perhaps maybe light perception, but they have to run with eye shades. Not as big a deal at camp like at an international level. Our goal is to train kids that you need to run against people that it makes sense. So a B3 athlete, it doesn't make sense that they can fairly compete against, say, a B1 athlete, vice versa. So they have the divisioning to make athletics fair based on their vision level. But in some sports, it doesn't matter because everyone wears eye shades. And when it's appropriate, only the kids that need eye shades wear them. So it varies sport to sport. But a lot of our sports, we don't do eye shades because nobody wears. If we're doing a lot of our outdoor recreation, skiing or paddleboarding or kayaking, canoeing, sailing, all that, everyone just goes as is. So whatever their vision is whatever their vision is. So we only wear the eye shades in sports where it makes sense or it's mandated.
Do you think that there are any other benefits to camp other than sport?
As much as we work on the inclusive approach to this, they sometimes feel very alone because they can't imagine that there's someone out there that's just like them. And I think that's another way that we give strength to our athletes and the kids that come to camp, is that all of a sudden they're like, you have a CVI, whatever it is. All of a sudden there's this bonding and this understanding of being around someone that's just like me, and right, to be around someone that understands you and gets you. And that's a real power of camp, is you spend a week with people that understand you. They learn from each other. How do you get this done in a more efficient manner? Split them up by ages when they're at camps. Then our teenage girls will often be like, well, how do you do your makeup? How do you get ready faster? How do you dry your hair? And just little things that they can teach each other from all the different tricks that they've learned. And that's the other amazing part of it. It's way more than sport. That sport is just the venue, but everything they learn is much larger than that.
Camp really does sound amazing. I will link in the show notes some more information on camp, a registration link, places where you can ask more questions, get additional information, so be sure to check that out. Thank you so much, Wendy, for taking the time to talk with me today, and I hope that I'll be able to meet you in person and see you at camp soon.
Well, that was a fun interview to listen to. I was thinking as I was listening about how it might feel like sports might be a long way off if your kiddo is maybe 6 months old, or even maybe if they're 3 or maybe a little bit older. But I think one of the important things to think about is that sports and games are even really important in early childhood, and they look maybe a little bit different than something like a swim meet or something like that, but they're still really important. So even something like encouraging your child to reach out in the environment, think about how you can create some little social games that you would naturally just do with your kid. You're both holding on to something, or you're maybe asking them to hand it to you, or you're giving it to them and tickling them with it or something like that. Like, that's promoting social skills, which is turn taking, and also a motor skill too. That's really important. And later on can maybe lend itself to something that would be a sport or sport-like, but you're playing a little sport, a little game with your baby as they're really young.
Like early ball play, even.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that turn taking, and that turns into something where they play with other people later. So.
Yeah, sports in a lot of ways are just really complicated games of turn taking.
That's right. It's group turn taking.
And another thing I was thinking about too is that we might think about how sports are something that some families maybe put more value on than others, but really, I think a lot of the things that we heard in the interview today really can be applied and be thought about with lots of other extracurricular activities too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that sport isn't necessarily the key thing to take from this, that your kids can do sports, but that you can apply these things to whatever it is your child likes, whether it's dance, art, musical theater. All of these things are things that your child can do with accommodations. So I think that we need to make sure that we're not counting our kids out and thinking that they shouldn't try something. I think it's important. I know that a lot of times we have a bunch of doctor's appointments and school and just everyday life, but I think it's important for us to give our children some kind of activity just so that they have something of their own. And it does develop that teamwork, that exercise, fun. It may be a lot of work to find the thing, adapt the thing, and get them there. But I think in the end, like, it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. I was also thinking too about how I understand that there might be some stress around, oh, there's another thing I got to add into my life. I got to make sure my kid plays a sport. But and maybe imagining what you like to do yourself and just including your child. Like for me, I love to go hiking. And Cathy, I know you like to go hiking too, because
Absolutely.
I see you on social media post pictures of you hiking all the time. But you might maybe initially think, oh, a blind person can't go hiking. They'll trip all over the place. No, they won't. They just need adaptations. Let your kid go hiking with you. And so that might be something that you can all do together. And then it's, again, a social and a bonding experience for everybody.
Absolutely. So that makes me think about what I was thinking about. So how can we connect this to what we do with little ones? Is I think it's really important that we have them in those environments. So whatever the environment is that you like, so if you like to go swimming, there's no reason why you can't take your 6-month-old to the pool and just have them hold them while they're in the pool. And then they're used to the kind of echoey sounds and the water and the unexpectedness, but they know that they're safe because you're holding them. And Paige, your hiking thing made me think there's some research show that it's a really good thing to get kids out in nature as much as possible. And one of the reasons I like to go hiking is I like to bird watch. And you might think, oh, well, my baby who can't see can't bird watch, but that is not true. Birds make noise, and they make different noises. So that's a great way to engage your little one on, do you hear that noise? What do you think that is? And the more they're exposed to it, the more they will enjoy it, I think. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Jenny, that they need to get out and build confidence. That's one of the things I liked about the interview, was that she very much wanted kids to build confidence in themselves and in their bodies, and that's a great thing, regardless whether they're winners or not. So your daughter swims?
She does.
So tell us more about that and what that's like for her.
So we're just at the beginning of our swim experience, so we don't have very much. She's only done like 1 or 2 meets and practices, but she really likes it. She likes being in the water. She likes having little friends and going. So that's been exciting. I didn't know anything about swim, so I didn't realize there were all these like technicalities with how you do a stroke and how you touch the wall and all that. So that's been kind of interesting. Like, she has to be pulled out of the pool a little more than other kids so they can actually like move her arms for her and kind of like show her this is what you're supposed to be doing. We videoed some, like the instructor showing her something so that she could put the screen up to her face closer and watch
Cool.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been helpful. She has tappers, which you can't buy. I don't know why I found this so interesting. I thought with like the Paralympics, you could just buy a tapper, but apparently they're not a thing. So we had to make it from Lowe's with like a PVC pipe with a noodle on the bottom of it. So like, or the top of it. So you tap her with the noodle. But I guess that's a learning thing in itself, because I guess as
she gets faster, we have to have a longer one to get her before. So that'll all
before
just
she
be very
hits the wall. Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know what'll happen with it, but she's having fun and getting exercise and has friends, so that's good. And it's been funny to see, or interesting, I guess, not funny, interesting to see people's reactions at swim meets when they see the tappers. Like, some people will be like, "What is that? I've been to 1,000 swim meets and I've never seen anything like that." Or we've heard people behind us being like, "I think that little girl's visually impaired, bless her heart." And we're just like, "Oh goodness, like she can be here, like she's good." So
that's right. And that's really important. So it's so not only is it important for your child to learn confidence that they can do things, but it's important to show other people that they can do things. It just requires some adaptations, like you said, with the tapper. And that makes me think too, I've also done a little bit of research on one of the things that's important for our kids with sports is pre-teaching. So it sounds like that's what they're doing when they pull your daughter out of the pool and they show her the stroke with her arms and watching the video. That's pre-teaching. So doing that, just like you would pre-teach a math skill before you actually do something and teach it in the class, that's exactly what our kids need. So it's opportunities and more time, and having your team, your teacher, the visually impaired, or your orientation mobility specialist, or the adaptive PE person help you with that. So did any of those people get involved with your daughter for the swimming?
Yeah, so her orientation and mobility specialist was a great resource in just kind of explaining what to say to the coach to figure out what would be best for her, and then also even answering the questions for like USA Swimming or Kentucky Swimming. Perfect. To figure, and this will be something that comes into play later if she decides to do para swimming, figure out like what category she's in and all of that. A lot of those things I wasn't even sure what the terminology meant. So our O&M was really helpful in saying, well, this is Hannah because of this, and then, giving me questions to ask and things like that. So yeah, and I actually had called Wendy. That's how I met Wendy, the person I interviewed, about the tappers. Someone had given me her name and how to talk with the coach about the tappers. So that's kind of how I met her.
Paige, how would you handle if a parent was like, this sport is really important to my family and I want my child to participate someday? What would you tell them to encourage them with a little one?
I would say bring your child to whatever that thing is that your family does, because we know that visual impairment impacts incidental learning, that just being able to know what something is by watching. But if they're there and they're participating along with you, and you're, like again, in the pool, you're holding your baby and they're listening to what the sounds are in the space, because it definitely sounds a lot different. Or I have one family that I work with right now who their child has a sibling who plays basketball, and you know what? They bring their kid to the basketball game and he's using his little pediatric belt cane to get around the space, and awesome. He's learning how the difference in the floor sounds and what the other kids are doing and what the crowd is, and he can kind of socialize. So I think that's the first step. And then, we talked about thinking about what types of skills does your child need in order to later on be able to participate. So those are all those developmental skills. Like this family, they may think about like maybe how they might adapt some ball sport for their kiddo, because that's important for them later on. So right now, like thinking about the American Printing House for the Blind, and even just Amazon has so many balls that are accessible that make sound or crinkle or do all kinds of really cool stuff. So just playing those little games back and forth where you're rolling a ball and rolling it back and forth, and then I think it just kind of moves on forward. And I think, Jenny, your story is just really cool to see how your just at the beginning, but you can kind of see on the horizons all the ways that it can become more complex. So I think it's just that step by step of first accepting and being empowered that your kid can do it. It might look different, but that's okay. And, it's not the end of the world oh no, they're blind, they can't. That's not true. Oh, they're blind. Let's figure out a different way and let's seek out those opportunities. So I think that can be helpful for families. It was really cool to talk about sports and how those things might look for kids in early childhood and moving on into adolescence and adulthood. So thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for the interview, Jenny.
Thank you so much for listening to Feeling This Life. Please consider subscribing to Feeling This Life wherever you get your podcasts. And please take a minute or two to give us your feedback and your ideas for future episodes by completing our survey, which is linked in the show notes. There, you'll also find ways to get in contact with us, and you'll find resources related to today's episode. Please join us again next time for another episode of Feeling This Life.